Hello there, my sleep fellows. Tonight, I welcome you back to the enchanted corridors of Hogwarts. Not to the stories you already know, but to a softer tale, one long whispered among portraits and drifting through quiet, candlelit halls. This is the story of the classes once taught at Hogwarts. Magical subjects now long forgotten, their secrets tucked gently behind time-worn stone and pages never turned. Some say these classes were once as important as potions or charms. Others say they were simply too powerful, too peculiar, or perhaps too easily lost to the ticking of ancient clocks. But whatever the reason, they vanished, leaving behind only subtle echoes and quiet memories scattered like stars across the history of the school. So tonight, we will gently follow those echoes. No battles, no dark lords, no duels in candlelight. Only quiet footsteps, warm magical light, and a secret or two carried gently on the wind that circles the North Tower. But before we begin, if you enjoy wandering through forgotten places and listening to magical stories beneath enchanted ceilings, you're always welcome to follow this journey, like the story, or subscribe for more tales of gentle magic and soft adventure. Now then, shall we continue? It begins, as many Hogwarts stories do, in autumn. The castle is wrapped in a warm chapassos of golden leaves and evening mist. Lanterns glow against the stone like floating stars, casting golden reflections on the glossy floors. The Black Lake rests calm and still, catching the pale shimmer of twilight skies. Far above, owls coast through the air in silence, heading back to the owlery after their evening flights. Inside, the halls hum gently with quiet life. Students carry books, hugged to their robes, their voices a soft murmur, laughter echoing faintly through the arches. The scent of roasted pumpkin and honeyed bread lingers in the air, trailing from the great hall as dinner fades into memory. Somewhere above, a clock chimes 8, not from the main tower, but from an older one, deep behind the divination classroom. Few hear it, fewer still remember what once rang there, but one curious soul, a student not unlike you, does hear it, and that chime, soft and almost forgotten, will begin something small, something gentle, something filled with magic, wonder, and a secret that has waited a very long time to be found. Are you ready? Let's quietly step forward, past the whispering portraits, past the flickering torches, and into the mystery of the forgotten classes of Hogwarts. His name was Elliot Fenwick, a quiet, inquisitive third-year Ravenclaw with a fondness for silence and scent-marked books. Elliot wasn't the sort of student who made loud entrances or raised his hand too high in class. He preferred back rows, worn pages, and the gentle tick of time passing. With a satchel always slightly too full and spectacles that slid down his nose, he was the sort of boy who noticed things that others missed, like how the fourth suit of armor on the 7th floor corridor sometimes shifted its helmet when no one was watching, or how the house elves left patterns in the soot when they polished the fireplaces. Elliot loved puzzles, not the kind with edges and pieces, but the sort of puzzles hidden in shadows or half-forgotten whispers. His dorm mates called him Professor Fenwick in a friendly sort of way, mostly because he always carried a notebook with strange diagrams no one else could make sense of, and because he once corrected Professor Binns on the founding date of an obscure wizarding school in northern Wales. Elliot blushed for a full week after that. His closest friend was Nellie Woodcroft, a second-year Hufflepuff with a mop of untamed hair and a smile that could light up even the quietest corner of the library. Nellie had a knack for finding passageways that weren't on any map and carried a bag of ever-fresh muffins that she claimed refilled themselves, though Elliot suspected she just made more each night with house elf permission. Nellie and Elliot were an odd pair, one always questioning the why of things, the other too busy exploring the how and where. But their friendship was as warm and comfortable as a well-worn cloak. They met every Wednesday evening by the reading nook under the Charms Tower, trading notes and tales, and occasionally watching the stars shift above the castle turrets through a narrow window no one else seemed to use. This particular week, however, Elliot had arrived earlier than usual, his expression thoughtful, eyes fixed on a folded parchment. It wasn't a marauder's map or any official Hogwarts document. It looked older, faded ink, brittle edges, and a strange little symbol in the top corner, a clock tower surrounded by runes. "I found this in the back of the restricted section index," he whispered to Nellie when she arrived, out of breath and trailing a few autumn leaves. Nellie blinked. But why would a parchment be hidden in an index? "Exactly," Elliot replied, tucking his glasses back up his nose. "And listen, last night, just after dinner, I heard a chime, a clock. But it wasn't from the main tower." Nellie tilted her head. "There's only one clock tower, isn't there?" Elliot smiled faintly, as if he'd been waiting for that question all along. "There used to be more." And just like that, their quiet world began to ripple, not with noise nor danger, but with curiosity. A curiosity that would soon lead them down forgotten staircases, into dust-covered rooms, and through lessons that hadn't been taught for over 100 years. The parchment crinkled softly in Elliot's hand as he and Nellie sat huddled beneath the reading nook's enchanted lantern. Outside, the wind swirled gently through the autumn-clad branches, making the castle feel both ancient and alive. It was late enough in the evening that most students were retreating to common rooms, leaving the corridors wrapped in a sleepy hush. Elliot unfolded the parchment again, smoothing the brittle paper against his knee. The clock tower symbol sat near the top, a simple drawing, circular in shape, with 12 tiny dots and an arrow that didn't quite point at any hour. But as the candlelight flickered across the ink, the arrow slowly shifted. Nellie's eyes widened. "Did you see that?" "It moves every few minutes," Elliot whispered, "but not in time. It doesn't follow hours or minutes. It turns when something else happens." "Like what?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I think it's tied to that sound I heard." "The chime." Nellie leaned in closer. "Where exactly were you when you heard it?" "In the arithmancy corridor," Elliot replied, "near the end, past the tapestry of blundering Beatrix. That's hardly ever used. Why would there be a chime there?" Elliot hesitated, then traced a finger around a faint circle drawn on the parchment. Because that's where I found this. The next evening, just after dinner, the two friends retraced Elliot's steps. The arithmancy corridor was unusually quiet, the walls lined with narrow windows that let in a dusky glow. A few enchanted lamps flickered overhead, casting soft rings of gold across the stone floor. Elliot paused near the tapestry. Beatrix, ever the comical duelist, was once again swinging her wand like a wooden spoon. Nellie grinned at it, but her eyes were already scanning the surroundings. "This way," Elliot said softly, guiding her to a small alcove just behind the tapestry. There was nothing special at first glance, just a bit of blank wall worn smooth by centuries of wind and robes brushing past. But Elliot pointed to a notch near the bottom corner. Nellie crouched, brushing her fingers along the stone. It felt slightly warmer than the rest of the wall. Then, as her palm flattened against it, there was a faint click. The wall shimmered. No dramatic movement, no roaring gears or sliding bricks. Just a shimmer, like mist on glass. And then, as if the wall had grown transparent, a doorway appeared. It was narrow, framed by ivy-like carvings that pulsed softly with silver light. Elliot and Nellie exchanged glances. "We should get a professor," Nellie said, voice barely a whisper. "And say what? That a moving arrow on a parchment led us to an invisible door?" Elliot smiled gently. "Besides, something wants to be found." The air beyond the doorway felt cooler, tinged with the scent of old wood and ink. As they stepped through, their shoes echoed softly on what felt like wooden floorboards. The corridor inside was dimly lit. Only the faintest glow emanated from thin lines in the walls, like light pulsing beneath ancient runes. It was a hallway of classrooms, or rather, what once had been classrooms. They passed empty lecture spaces with desks covered in dust, blackboards etched with faded spells, and bookshelves half sunken into shadow. The walls were lined with strange banners, some bearing Hogwarts colors, but others displaying sigils and symbols neither of them recognized. One room caught Nellie's attention. "This one's warm," she murmured, pressing her hand against the worn oak door. It creaked open slowly, revealing a small circular classroom lit by floating orbs of pale blue light. Unlike the others, this room was clean. The dust was absent, the desks aligned in perfect rows. At the far end stood a podium carved from ashwood, and behind it, a wall covered in parchment strips. Each strip bore a single word, written in the same elegant, old-fashioned script. "Dreamweaving," Nellie read aloud. Elliot stepped forward, studying the wall. "All of these are lesson names. Mirror walking, thought binding, memory grafting. These aren't in the curriculum," Elliot said softly, "not even in the archives." Nellie slowly walked toward the front desk, where a soft glow hovered above the podium. As she reached out, the glow condensed into a shimmering sphere, like a memory, but tinged with golden mist. Without touching it, she leaned closer, and the classroom came alive. There was no sound, but the air shimmered with soft, translucent figures, students, seated at the desks, appeared as wisps, some with open scrolls, others laughing or jotting notes. A tall woman with silver streaks in her hair stood at the front, moving her hands in slow, weaving gestures. Threads of light arced from her fingers, wrapping gently around the students' heads, then vanishing into their books. Nellie gasped. "It's like a preserved moment," she whispered. "But it's not a memory, not a pensieve. It's more like a ghost of a lesson." Elliot nodded, his eyes scanning every detail. These classes were real, taught right here, but they've been erased. "Why?" Nellie whispered. The room faded, and the orb dimmed, its light retreating yake into the air. The floating figures dissolved, leaving only quiet and the faint scent of lavender. As they stepped back into the corridor, the parchment in Elliot's hand shifted again. The arrow turned once more, this time pointing straight downward to a newly revealed marking, a faded symbol of a tree wrapped in a serpent. "It's guiding us," Elliot murmured, "to more of them." But why would Hogwarts hide its own history? Elliot's voice was calm, but determined. Maybe it wasn't Hogwarts that hid them. Maybe something else, someone else, erased them. They didn't speak after that for a while. The magic of the forgotten class still clung to their senses like mist. But deep down, they both knew this was only the beginning. The chime Elliot had heard was no accident. It was a signal, a soft, ancient call to memory. And somewhere in the heart of the castle, beyond walls long ignored and staircases long closed, the rest of the lesson waited, patient, pulsing, almost alive. As they walked back toward the corridor's shimmered entrance, they failed to notice a flicker of light behind them, just a faint pulse along the banner that read Dreamweaving. It glowed, then faded as if winking at them. The following evening, the castle once again exhaled into twilight, and its long corridors softened into pools of gold and shadow. Dinner had ended, and the chattering masses had returned to their common rooms. Yet, somewhere behind the library's south wing, Elliot and Nellie crouched in silence, watching a stretch of blank stone that only they knew was not blank at all. They had returned to the hidden hallway, the corridor of forgotten classrooms. With the parchment's arrow now pointing toward the symbol of the serpent-entwined tree, the two friends had marked a new goal: discover what the symbol meant and why these classes had vanished from memory. They stepped through the shimmered archway again, and the soft hum greeted them like an old friend. The air was once again cool and scented with lavender and ink. Their footsteps were quieter this time, more reverent. Nellie touched the walls as they walked. "It feels like the place knows we're coming now, as if it remembers us." Elliot nodded. "I keep feeling that too. Like, we're not alone here, but it's not a bad thing. It's like walking into a dream you forgot you had." They passed the dream-weaving classroom again. The orb above the podium glowed faintly in acknowledgement, but they didn't stop. The arrow now pointed further down the corridor, toward a door with no visible handle and a surface smooth as a glass. Elliot stepped close. No keyhole, no lock, just waiting. "Do you think the parchment?" Nellie began, but the moment she said it, the parchment shimmered. A thin thread of silver light, unspooled from the paper and floated to the door like a line of starlight. As it touched the surface, the door melted, not opened, but turned fluid like water rippling in slow motion. A gentle wind emerged from within. It carried the scent of old forests, parchment, and something else, something living. They stepped into a circular chamber. The walls were curved stone, lined with shelves carved directly into the rock. Instead of books, each shelf held large glass spheres, each filled with moving mist and colors that pulsed like breath. In the center stood a solitary desk. Upon it sat a book so ancient that its spine had faded into the color of the wood beneath it. Gold lettering shimmered faintly across the front, Botanomancy and the living magic of trees. Nellie gently opened it. The pages were handwritten in spidery ink, the words curling like ivy across the parchment. She whispered, "This was a class too, a whole branch of study." Elliot scanned the shelves. These glass spheres, some of them are warm, others feel cold. He touched one gently. It flickered with green, and a pulse of light moved down his fingers. It's like they're memories, not thoughts, but feelings. Nellie found a note tucked into the spine of the book, a small folded paper, fragile with age. On it, a drawing of a tree split in half, one side blooming, the other skeletal. Beneath it, a single sentence: "The tree remembers what we forget." Before either of them could speak, one of the glass orbs began to glow. They turned to it, eyes wide, as light poured out, and formed a slow, swirling image midair. This time, it wasn't a ghostly memory of a classroom. It was the forest. More specifically, the Forbidden Forest. The projection showed the trees not as looming dangers, but as sentient beings. Light pulsed through their bark like veins. Roots moved subtly beneath the earth. In the image, a group of students stood in a clearing, their wands lowered, hands open, as vines slowly encircled their feet, not to bind, but to connect. And in the center of the clearing stood a professor. Her eyes were closed, arms raised, her body glowing softly as the trees around her shimmered in unison. The wind carried not sound, but understanding. This was a lesson," Elliot whispered. They were learning how to speak to the trees. Nellie's voice was hushed, to feel the world's memories. The image shimmered, and the glowing forest dissolved, replaced by the inside of a study. That same professor, older now, stood before a council of shadows. Their faces were obscured, their voices silent, but their gestures were firm. She lowered her wand. Her face was sorrowful. The book in her hands, the same book Nellie held, was closed and handed over to one of the council. The final image froze on the professor's face. A whisper seemed to slip from the memory, though neither could explain how they heard it. "If knowledge is buried, then who will remember to ask the trees for help?" Then the orb dimmed. Silence returned. Elliot exhaled slowly. These aren't just forgotten classes. They were removed on purpose. By the council, Nellie said, or whoever they were. But why? Elliot turned back to the desk and ran his fingers over the carved symbols etched around the edges. These classes weren't dangerous. They were beautiful, peaceful, but maybe too powerful, Nellie said quietly. Imagine what someone could do if they could feel every root beneath the ground, if they could speak with forests, know when something's wrong in the earth before anyone else does. It's ancient magic, Elliot said, older than wands, and someone feared that. They sat down in silence. The room didn't feel ominous. It felt mournful, like a classroom heading for students who never came back. The parchment in Elliot's pocket pulsed again. He pulled it out and gasped. The page had changed entirely. Gone was the original arrow and its static symbols. Now, a new illustration bloomed across the parchment like ink in water. A map, not of Hogwarts as it currently was, but as it might have been long ago. Tunnels extended from places no longer accessible. Towers stood where none existed now, and in the center of the map, marked in silver ink, was a symbol Elliot recognized immediately: the clock tower. But the clock tower isn't on this part of the castle, Nellie whispered. Not anymore, which means, Elliot said, the parchment is showing us not what is, but what was. A faint chime echoed, once again deep and low like a heartbeat. But this time, they knew it came from within the map. A silvery thread began to draw itself from their current position to that silver clock tower. Not a path they could take directly, but perhaps eventually. It's guiding us again, Elliot said. Nellie looked back at the classroom of glass orbs. And we're not just uncovering history anymore, are we? No, Elliot said. We're stepping into it. As they exited the botanomancy room, the shimmer behind them faded, not with secrecy, but with finality, as if the room had offered all it could and now would return to rest. But the castle was changing, the past was waking, and somewhere in the stones of Hogwarts, the clock tower waited, its final chime echoing not through time, but through memory. As the days passed, the forgotten classroom began to subtly call out to Hermione and her friends, each time revealing just a little more of its secret past. It became a part of their lives, almost like a quiet whisper on the edges of their days. No longer did it feel eerie or haunting. Rather, it held a patient curiosity, like an old friend finally willing to speak. It was Hermione who began to notice the subtle changes first. Every morning as they entered the room, a new object had appeared, not through magic they could recognize, but by some quiet unfolding of the room's memory. One day, it was a faded textbook titled A Study of Forgotten Enchantments, with curling parchment and ink that glowed softly in dim light. Another day, a single white quill floated gently above a desk, waiting for someone to use it. It feels like the room is remembering, Hermione whispered as she traced her fingers across the edge of a carved wooden desk, worn smooth by time and use. Harry nodded thoughtfully, glancing around. Or maybe it's responding to us, like it wants to be part of the school again. Ron, however, was watching the ceiling. I swear those constellations are shifting, he murmured. They weren't in that pattern yesterday. Indeed, the celestial ceiling had begun to change, aligning itself with the constellations of the current night sky, something that had not happened before. And along the archways, new inscriptions began to glow faintly, as though invisible ink was revealing itself under moonlight. Hermione was the first to recognize the script, ancient runes not used in centuries. "They tell a story," she said breathlessly, deciphering the glowing lines, a lesson lost to time. The students of this room were learning something that faded from history, something important. Together, they began documenting what they could. The stories on the arches spoke of old magic, lessons of harmony, balance, and the deeper understanding of magical intention. This wasn't spellcasting for defense or showmanship. It was about connection with nature, with each other, with the very heart of magic. One evening, as a storm rolled gently across the hills beyond the castle, the trio sat within the room with soft candlelight flickering. Rain pattered against the distant enchanted windows, and the room seemed to grow warmer, like it was sheltering them. Hermione opened the old textbook again and found a page she hadn't seen before. She read aloud, "To those who seek truth not in power, but in purpose, let the lesson reveal itself only through choice and curiosity." Below the line, the text shimmered and vanished. The moment she read it, the walls around them pulsed gently with a golden hue. The room responded not with answers, but with invitations. A door that had once been only decorative creaked open, revealing a narrow spiral staircase curling downward. Ron's eyes widened. Well, that wasn't there yesterday. They glanced at each other. No fear, just gentle wonder. Hermione stood first. "Shall we see what it wants to show us?" They descended quietly, the walls lined with floating lights that blinked into life as they passed. The air was cool, filled with the scent of old stone and lavender. The staircase led to a circular chamber, not unlike the one above, but older, ancient even. A round pool rested in the center, still and silver. Runes etched into its stone rim glowed with a pulse, and the air hummed with quiet power. "It's like a pensieve," Harry said softly, kneeling beside it, "but not for memories. Something else." Hermione closed her eyes, sensing the energy. "I think it's for forgotten knowledge, not lost, just waiting." As they gazed into the pool, images began to shimmer on its surface, scenes of Hogwarts in older times, students learning by moonlight, professors speaking not from chalkboards, but from gardens and riversides. Magic being taught through song, through weaving, through dreams. It was a different Hogwarts, one built not just on spells, but on understanding. The vision faded gently, leaving behind a feeling rather than facts. A feeling of unity, of timelessness. A call to remember what had once been cherished. Ron whispered, "Do you think Dumbledore knew about this?" Hermione gave a small smile. "I think he always knew more than he let on." They returned upstairs as the storm faded. The room, now fully awakened, hummed with quiet contentment. A tapestry had appeared overnight on the back wall, a depiction of the room itself, with students from all houses learning together, surrounded by stars and vines. The trio stood before it, hearts calm and full. The suspense had never been sharp or jarring, but it had pulled them forward like a gentle current. And in its flow, they had found something they didn't even know was missing. Not power, not secrets, but remembrance. And in that remembrance, the soft beginning of something new. They stayed a while longer, resting in that warmth. As the candles flickered lower and the sky outside turned a deeper blue, the gentle suspense gave way to quiet understanding. There were still more steps to take, more lessons to uncover. But for now, they had found the rhythm of forgotten magic, and it would guide them forward with a whisper, not a roar. The quiet hush of the hidden corridor seemed to embrace Hermione and Harry like an old friend, its stone walls exhaling the breath of long-lost enchantments. The air, still but not stale, carried the subtle scent of aged parchment and dried lavender, a blend that seemed to echo the wisdom once stored within the place. A gentle draft whispered along the floor, lifting Hermione's curls and rustling the hem of Harry's robes. At the far end of the corridor stood a single wooden door, weathered but proud, its iron hinges shaped like curled ivy. Faint, pulsing light seeped from underneath. Harry gave Hermione a sideways glance, his brow lifted slightly in curiosity, while Hermione, ever the eager scholar, stepped forward without hesitation. "I think it's waiting for us," she murmured, laying her hand flat against the wood. The door responded without resistance. It creaked inward with a sigh, revealing a small classroom unlike any they'd ever seen. No rows of desks, no blackboard, no visible bookshelves. Instead, the room shimmered with golden specks in the air, like dust particles dancing in sunbeams, and at its center was a circular platform floating gently just above the ground. 4 low-backed chairs were arranged in a circle atop it, and hovering in the middle was a soft silver orb. "It's like it wants us to sit," Harry whispered. Hermione nodded. This must have been one of the forgotten classrooms. But what subject could this have been for? Together, they stepped onto the platform. As they sat, the orb brightened, casting a halo of silver light that settled over them like a dream. Then, without a sound, the walls around them began to shift, not physically, but in memory. Scenes bloomed into place like ghostly tapestries, glimpses of students from long ago, seated just as they were, leaning in with curious eyes. A kind-faced professor appeared, only a projection, faint but warm. She had soft robes and an open posture, her hair tucked into a bun streaked with moonlight. "Welcome to Perceptive Magic," her voice echoed, lilting and kind. A subject once taught to those ready to listen, not only with their ears, but with their hearts. Harry blinked. Perceptive magic? Hermione's eyes gleamed. "I read something once, barely a footnote in a very old volume. It was a study of magical intuition, the idea that some spells live in feelings, not incantations." The memory continued. The professor moved among the students of the past, guiding them through silent exercises, sharing thoughts without speaking, sensing feelings from enchanted objects, even calming a wilting plant with nothing but a steady presence. As the projection faded, the orb pulsed again, now displaying faint glowing symbols, choices perhaps. 4 paths hovered before them in flickering light, each leading to a different aspect of perceptive magic. One glowed blue, with an image of water swirling in calm harmony. One shimmered green, showing roots reaching deep into earth. One pulsed red, revealing a flickering flame cupped safely in two hands, and the last shone pale gold, an empty path with no symbol at all. Hermione turned to Harry. "I think we're meant to choose, not for marks or points, but to understand." Harry stood, eyes scanning the visions. "Let's take different ones," he said gently. "We might learn more that way." Hermione stepped toward the green path, her affinity for nature and knowledge pulling her like a compass needle. As her foot crossed the light, the classroom faded into a woodland glade, warm and humming with life. She could feel the heartbeat of the earth, slow and steady beneath her feet. Kneeling near a patch of clover, she placed her palm on the moss and whispered a calming breath. The leaves responded, lifting ever so slightly, as though greeting an old friend. In her heart, she didn't cast a spell. She simply listened, and in the silence she heard something ancient, something living, a whisper that said, "Remember us, remember we are part of you." Meanwhile, Harry had chosen the blue path. He found himself standing on the banks of a wide, starlit lake, still and glassy, reflecting constellations above. He walked to the edge, dipped his hand into the water, and immediately the ripples shimmered with emotion. A faint echo of his own thoughts played back to him through the movement of the surface. Memories of moments when he had needed calm, when he had needed courage, when he had chosen compassion over anger. Each ripple sang softly of the boy he had been and the man he was becoming. In the center of both paths, above the classroom's hidden foundation, the silver orb remained, watching, learning, remembering. Eventually, both Hermione and Harry found themselves gently returned to the floating platform, changed in ways they couldn't yet name. The room was quiet once more, but the light in the orb had deepened to a warm, knowing glow. "I don't think this was ever a subject meant to be tested," Hermione whispered. "It was a reminder." Harry smiled faintly, that even magic has a soul. They left the classroom in silence, the kind that speaks of reverence. As they stepped back into the castle's quiet halls, a new sense of calm wrapped around them, like a soft blanket at dusk. And somewhere, deep in the heart of Hogwarts, another door sighed open. As twilight brushed its soft fingers across the high towers of Hogwarts, the castle bathed itself in gentle purples and golds. The sky outside glimmered with fading hues, and inside the halls, lanterns flickered to life like old friends waking from a peaceful slumber. Harry and Hermione wandered quietly through the dim corridors, their footsteps muffled on thick rugs, their minds still swirling with the sensations of perceptive magic. They hadn't spoken much since their return from the hidden classroom, but the silence between them was not one of confusion. It was of quiet understanding. The castle, in its ancient way, had given them something not even Professor Dumbledore could have gifted with words alone. A lesson from the past, still pulsing softly in the bones of the school. Just before the grand staircase, a new detail caught Hermione's attention, barely noticeable unless one was already steeped in magical curiosity. A single brick along the wall shimmered faintly, like dew catching starlight. Her brow furrowed gently. "Harry," she said softly, touching the brick with her fingertips. "This wasn't here yesterday." The wall responded not with movement, but with feeling, a low hum, a resonance that seemed to echo in their chests. The stone shifted under her hand, folding away like curtains opening to a memory. Beyond it lay a chamber they had never seen before. Its ceiling was low and domed, carved with intertwining vines and stars. The air inside smelled like old wood and candle wax, with a faint trace of rose. At its center stood a table, not grand, but worn and loved. Upon it lay dozens of rolled parchments, scattered quills, and a journal with an embroidered cover. Hovering above the table, spinning gently, was a map, but not of any terrain they recognized. It was a living memory, a constellation of all the classrooms Hogwarts had ever housed. Hermione stepped forward in awe. It's the full layout of the castle's teaching history, every subject, even the ones that were lost. As they leaned in, tiny lights flared softly on the map. The glowing orbs marked classrooms now forgotten, erased from schedules, and abandoned by time. Perceptive magic, elemental empathy, dream cartography, wandless intuition, all gently pulsing. "It's like the school remembers even when we don't," Harry murmured. Hermione opened the embroidered journal. Inside, pages were filled with the looping handwriting of a professor long past. Her ink faded, but her voice clear. It was Professor Elowen Sage, the same who had appeared to them in the perceptive magic classroom. Her journal began softly. "When the world forgets, it is the duty of magic to remember." Hermione read aloud, her voice low and melodic in the quiet room. These classes were never removed out of cruelty or neglect. They faded when the world became too hurried to hear them. When magic became about control, not connection. When spells were recited like recipes and not sung like lullabies. Harry felt something stir in his chest, a quiet ache, like he'd missed something he hadn't known to miss. Hermione's eyes shimmered behind her glasses. "She knew," Hermione whispered. "She knew the school's heart was more than curriculum and competition." These classes were about listening, feeling, trusting magic to guide, not just obey. As they continued reading, a soft bell rang in the distance, not one they'd heard before. It wasn't the dinner bell. It wasn't from the tower. It was slower, older. "The clock tower," Harry breathed, "but it hasn't chimed in years." "Not since before our first year." They turned quickly and stepped out of the chamber. From somewhere high above, the clock tower let out another long, echoing chime. It rolled through the stone like a memory waking up. Students down in the halls paused and looked up. Professors turned toward the sound with wide eyes. No one spoke. It was as if the whole castle had taken a collective breath. Hermione glanced at the map one last time. With each chime, another forgotten classroom glowed, slowly, reverently, as if time itself was gently setting things right. "The clock tower's final chime," she whispered. "It wasn't broken. It was waiting," Harry nodded, "waiting for someone to listen." The bell tolled once more, then fell into silence. But the silence felt full, not empty. It was the silence of completion, of understanding, of prophecy fulfilled, not through drama or battle, but through gentle remembrance. Professor Sage's journal had one last entry. Should the chime ring again, it means the school has remembered its softer heart. The forgotten classes will rise not with trumpets, but with trust. They were never truly lost, only sleeping. Hermione closed the journal slowly, her hands cradling it as if it were a living thing. We didn't just find a hidden class, she said softly. We reawakened Hogwarts itself. The realization settled over them like a warm blanket. No need for heroics, no need for fanfare. Sometimes the most powerful magic was quiet, gentle, almost forgotten. Together, they left the chamber and returned to the hallway, where the castle once again looked the same, but felt entirely different. And as they walked back toward the common room, they passed students whose steps had slowed, whose eyes had begun to wonder, as if Hogwarts was whispering to each of them now. The castle was unusually quiet that evening. Not the kind of silence that falls after a storm, but the gentle stillness of contentment, like a library that has just closed its doors, or a lullaby that has finished its final verse. The corridors of Hogwarts glowed softly with the amber light of enchanted sconces, and the stone walls seemed to hum with a calm only old magic could provide. Harry and Hermione walked slowly through the familiar hallways, their steps echoing faintly, though not disruptively. The revelation of the forgotten classrooms had left no chaos in its wake, only wonder. There had been no urgent rush to inform teachers, no frantic unraveling of secrets. Instead, there was a quiet understanding shared between them and the castle, as if Hogwarts itself had spoken and they had listened well. The warmth of the Gryffindor common room welcomed them back like a gentle embrace. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, and a few students sat nearby, speaking in hushed tones or sipping tea, their eyes reflecting the same curiosity that had awakened in Harry and Hermione. A sense of peace lingered in the air, heavier than usual, but in the most comforting way. Hermione settled into her favorite armchair, the one by the window, where she could see the moonlight silvering the black lake in the distance. She opened the old journal one last time, turning to a page she hadn't read aloud before. To those who find this, may your hearts stay open and your minds stay kind. Magic will always whisper to those who remember how to listen. She closed the book slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of the soft, worn cover. Harry sat nearby, quietly watching the flames dance. Neither of them needed to speak anymore. The adventure had not ended with a bang or a final spell, but with an understanding, and that was more than enough. From the windows, they noticed owls gliding through the moonlight, calm and sure in their flight. The lake below glistened like a pool of starlight, and the forbidden forest swayed gently under a sleepy breeze. Everything around them had settled into a hush, as though the entire world of magic was sighing in relief. There was a sense that the castle was healing something forgotten, not just in bricks or lessons, but in its very spirit. Students passing in the halls now glanced at certain doors a second longer. Professors paused in conversations, their eyes growing distant, thoughtful. A seed had been planted, not of disruption, but of remembrance. Later that night, Harry stood by the window in the dormitory, gazing up at the astronomy tower. A faint golden glow shimmered around it, not bright enough to draw attention, but enough to be noticed by someone who had learned to see with more than just their eyes. Perhaps, he thought, some magic wasn't meant to be taught from textbooks. Perhaps some magic lived in moments like this, quiet, unseen, but deeply felt. Hermione had tucked the embroidered journal safely into a pouch she'd charmed to preserve old parchment. She'd said she might give it to the library, or maybe not. Some things, she had whispered with a smile, are best rediscovered slowly. As the night deepened and the castle grew quieter still, the warmth from the fire remained steady. Sleep came softly to those who sought it, wrapped in the gentle embrace of a place that had remembered its forgotten heart. The chime of the clock tower had faded once again into silence, but it was no longer waiting. It was watching, content that someone had listened. And somewhere in the depths of the castle, perhaps in a hallway not marked on any map, a classroom door waited, not to be forced open, but to be gently found. So now, dear listener, as the final embers in the common room fire glow softly and the moon casts silver veils across the windows of Hogwarts, let your thoughts slow, like the quiet ripples of the Black Lake under starlight. You've walked ancient halls tonight, listened to whispers from classrooms long forgotten, and stood where secrets were kept, not out of fear, but out of patience. Because magic, like memory, sometimes chooses the right moment to return. Harry and Hermione didn't stumble upon danger or duels this time. Instead, they found something even more precious, a reminder that magic thrives in silence, in wonder, in trust, a lesson that not all knowledge is loud, and not every mystery needs solving. Some simply need to be remembered. The castle, too, seems calmer now, doesn't it? Almost as if it's dreaming alongside you. Its walls breathe with history, its portraits sleep in their frames, and the candlelight along the corridors flickers like lullabies, guiding weary footsteps back to bed. And you've been part of that magic tonight. You've wandered softly through stone passageways. You've touched the time-worn desk of a vanished professor. You've listened for the echo of chalk on a dusty blackboard where no one stands. But now, it's time to let the story settle. Let your eyelids grow heavy, as if draped in the velvet of the Ravenclaw Tower's midnight sky. Let your breathing slow, in rhythm with the steady tick of the castle's enchanted clocks. Let your mind find quiet, knowing that the mysteries of Hogwarts are patient. They will wait for another night. Because in this world of magic and wonder, there's always more to find, always more to feel, always more to dream. Good night, my dear sleepy friend. Sleep softly, and may your dreams carry you through hidden doorways, across candlelit bridges, and into forgotten classrooms, where stories wait like spells, gentle and everlasting.